was a really unique approach that I thought was a great way to say, in our school community, literacy is important.
Teresa, were they all
Yes.
reading the same text? Like, did
Yes,
they? Okay.
at Bull's Gap, that they chose a text and it was student generated. The idea was student generated, so the students got to pull ideas for the text, and then the most popular one was the one that they read. I think, is this Christie's school or
Brooke, I believe. Brooks.
it's Brooks? I was
Mhm.
going to say we could ask Brooke if they plan to stay with that structure for the following year, but the reason they wanted the same text is so that when they came together on book club night, they would have that common thread to talk through. We've done a similar thing with the coaches, but we had two texts, and that's an interesting way to do a book study too. One more example of a school-wide implementation that we thought was really did a great job of capturing this access to text was T.A. Duggar. And T.A. Duggar did two different things that I thought were really interesting. They actually chose a 15-minute block every day where the entire school stopped and read. And this was choice reading, and that was a really important piece of that. And we're going to get to what the research says about choice. And then they also provided anytime library access. And that meant if a student wanted to check out a book, magazine, whatever they wanted to check out, video, they could go to, they had two libraries in their school, the big library, and then it's a multi-level school, so they had a small one upstairs so that it was close enough. But instead of saying you can only go during your ELA block, kids were allowed to go at any point in time throughout the day or week where their teacher had a little bit of downtime, and their teacher could allow them a pass to go check out the book. A couple of interesting things happened here. The 15 minutes a day reading meant, because it was school-wide all at the same time, kids in their math class just stopped and picked up whatever novel they had chosen and read. And that was great because now they're in math class being given time to read. And I'll get to like the stress of that too for the teachers. But what was really important about this piece was they designed it so that it didn't take away instructional time from the math teacher, but also the teachers were expected to fully participate in this. And so what the students started to see was that every single adult in the building, their math teacher, their science teacher, the principal, the custodians, every single adult in the building was supposed to be reading during these 15 minutes. And they started to see the adults around them as readers. And so, oh, I didn't know you read that. And they would have conversations about text with the adults around them, people that you might not know that your science teacher has to do a lot of reading to keep up with science, but that sparks that conversation. And the way that they were strategic about the library access was, because this is also a middle school, they thought about the adolescents in their building and how social interaction is really important to adolescents. And what they did was they curated a bunch of text, but they curated them in like multiples. And so they would buy 10 of a popular novel. And what ended up happening quite organically, they were hoping this would happen, but they didn't push the kids together. But what ended up happening is kids would see each other with the same book, and they would stop in the hallways, or they would start sitting together at lunch. And so that really fostered this conversation about, what are you reading? What am I reading? Oh my gosh, did you get to this part yet? And it became another social aspect of their school day. And so that's how they started to foster, everybody in our school community is going to be a reader, and we're going to take time to stop and talk about reading. So that was a couple of actual school examples, but I wanted to also provide kind of an approach example from across all of the schools that we've worked with. And what we really saw was that they made literacy a priority, and a lot of schools did it through budget. And there was a little grant money, but they were not given like a windfall of money to do this. But what they did do was, with some of their supply monies, they took and they added to classroom libraries. And the classroom library idea expanded into every classroom in the school, not just the ELA classrooms. And that was important in a lot of the situations, because in every room they were seeing access to text. They turned to their librarians to help curate these classroom libraries, and that was also important. And the budget priority there is giving your librarian time to work with other content area teachers, so that when you're in the math classroom and you have text, some of those texts actually bring out pieces that are important, like about true actual mathematicians or mathematics used in a series in some way that was important. Like we think about just the TV show Numbers, which, you know, like some way that there is actually literature combining with the content area, but also then some free choice fiction books in that room too. But taking advantage of your librarian and giving them the time to partner with other content area teachers was important. And what all of these budget priorities ended up doing was giving access to literature across content. So thinking in your budget about, is there access to some scientific literature that we can provide? Is there just a thing we can purchase that subscription to that technology, and it allows the science teacher to now change the reading level of a text that they need a child to access. Thinking about your budget is important. What were the essential elements that we found in success across the schools? Everybody in the whole school community should be taken into account as you build this vision of a literacy-based community. Everybody had to support it with time and resources. And so that means if you want your mathematics teacher to be supporting literacy, you need time. And that time might be, we're going to get to some lessons that are not ELA based, but that time might actually just be some professional time with others to help brainstorm what they can do more to make the shifts that are going to help. A willingness from everybody to check in on what we planned at the beginning of the year and adjust it that's needed. And then making decisions based on research. And so this is where we're going to go. And I'm going to, just so you can mentally prepare, I'm going to ask you to contribute a little bit about what you think is already happening in your school after we talk about this high-level research. So years and years and years and years of literacy research have brought us to this point where we know basically there are 6 things that are essential to helping every student become more literate. And we use these big buckets to categorize them, but I will go through each bucket. But this is like your cheat sheet. If you want to print out this slide from the deck, this is the cheat sheet. This is what I would talk about with teachers. These are the words I would use. But providing choice. Oh, I'll go through the next more detailed slide. When we talk about choice, what we're really talking about is giving a child every day the opportunity to read something he or she chooses. And now when we think about every child and every day, it is really important that we think about these 6 things don't have to happen in the ELA classroom every day. These 6 things have to happen across a day of a child's life. And so is there a point in the day where every child gets to choose the thing that they're reading? That can be 5 minutes, it can be an hour, it depends on what that day looks like, but they should have a choice. Is there an opportunity every day for every child to read something accurately? Now, this is where you're thinking about kind of what level are they actually reading at? And so can they read it accurately? Do they have access to a text that they actually understand? Every child has to read something that they that they understand. So when they read with fluency, they read the text accurately, they also have to then be able to understand it, right? And we do have to put extra supports in to help get them to the point where they understand. And I'm going to do a little bit of that in some of the other content areas today. Every child writes about something personally meaningful. And this one's big because I think we do know kids need to be writing every day, but how can we make those writing prompts so that at least once a day they're writing about something that's personally meaningful to them? And that doesn't always mean they get to choose the topic carte blanche, but it has to be they have to be able to relate it. Number 5, every child talks with peers about reading and writing, and this is a step we often skip. We skip in instruction a lot, allowing children to talk to each other. But children talking to each other at all ages, K-12, is a really important piece of learning science that helps them to process and build meaning. And then every child listens to a fluent adult read, and that is something I often see at the elementary level that starts to get glazed over as kids progress through middle and high school, but it is extremely important. If we want children to be able to read accurately, they need to see a model of a fluent adult reading. And that doesn't always have to be the teacher, but it is good in every classroom for a child to hear it read aloud. So thinking about these 6 things across a day in school, not just in the ELA classroom. that's the goal, that's the vision for a school leader to help support literacy across all content areas. And so what I'm gonna do, my mouth is dry, that means I'm talking too much, is I'm gonna pause. And what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna ask people to share, what do you think is already happening in your school? You can drop this in the chat. I'm super comfortable with you jumping on the mic too, if you're a talker. Just share, what do you think is happening in your school already that kind of hits those 6 high elements: choice, accuracy, personally meaningful writing? What is happening already? Oh, thank you, Bethany, for dropping that link in the chat.
Some of our teachers are basically in the English language arts classrooms. Sometimes you'll walk into a math class or an English class and they'll have the students connect what they're learning in the class to their personal lives through a question that way. But there isn't, say, a 15-minute period where they really have free reign to choose something that they would like to read. And I would like to see more of that. So
more choice, yeah. But it's great, Karen, that you can say, like, I see it. I do see some of these things happening across the day, which is really important as a leader, as you're helping to walk through and gauge it. It looks like Letha dropped something in the chat, but I'm not sure. Were you saying we have it? Do you have access to a mic? I just don't want to not honor what you shared. Oh, you have 20-minute drop everything in read time. And is that a choice book? And I think the important thing about when people, yes, choice book, I think the really nice thing about the way T.A. Duggar did the drop everything and read, not only was it choice, and it didn't have to even be a book, it was choice of what they wanted to read, but also having the teachers model that was really important. And then Pamela says, our high school students are welcome in the library at any time, but our class is really tight. That is a common challenge in high school, the schedule, that bell that rules the world, right? For all students to visit. Oh, and Pam, are you the school library media coordinator? You're the librarian? Open before and after school, right? And if you can provide that after school opportunity, it's really great and important. I think also the kids who finish tests early often have access, but I wonder if there isn't like an I wish list where more than a student could check out for another student. I know I'm probably stressing any media coordinator or librarian who's on here by saying that. Can you check out a book for another student that can't get there? That would be, yes. Teachers have a poster outside the room that lists the title of the book they're reading. I love that. Showing teachers as readers is a really important part of building a literacy culture in a school. Yes, I love it. That's great. And if you are a school leader, always including what you're reading. And I know you're always reading something, even if it's a research article. Hannah says one of her friends who teaches math incorporate daily vocab in their interactive notebooks. Oh, that's so great. Books on famous mathematicians. Just so, I don't know if I said it at the beginning, but I taught high school math. My origin story is very odd. Flexible seating gets my students excited about reading. Yes, I have seen that. That builds a culture. If there are places to get comfy and read, some people need that. I need that. I'm sitting on a couch right now. Posters of teachers with their favorite books. That's awesome. These are great ideas, and I appreciate you all jumping in and sharing, because if anything, as leaders, everybody needs lots of strategies and ideas to share. Students can choose what they want to read for pleasure and then also read an informational book. That's awesome, giving them the choice and then saying, and these are your requirements, much like we treat all students in our classrooms, right? Okay, you can do this, you can decide this piece, but we have to have these structures in place in this rubric. And the librarian does consultations. That's amazing. I love that. And that's a way to take advantage of those in-depth skills that our librarians have that we don't always capitalize on. All right, great. Well, thank you all for sharing. I hope that you continue to share in the chat, and I am going to keep us moving because I don't want to go over my time. I know you all have other things Before we dive into the individual content areas, I just like to say that when we think about literacy across the content areas, you know, I've really focused so far school-wide, what are they reading, what are they writing, etc. But when you walk into a classroom for social studies or for science, you don't necessarily have to see kids engaged specifically in reading a novel or an article. There are a lot of small shifts that our content area teachers can make that will make a huge difference for literacy supports. And I'm going to talk through just a couple examples with you, and I will go, I think they're not going to build out a whole lesson plan, but one of them is a sample lesson plan. But I just want you to kind of think about with me, what are the small differences that can be made to any lesson that will really help to support literacy without saying, okay, you have to stop teaching mathematics and start teaching literacy. How can we do the two things simultaneously? Because time is the variable we will never have more of. So this is, I'm going to give you a math example, but this kind of the same thinking behind the math and science for this type of example. One of the things that's important in mathematics and science is to, and that is clearly important in all of the disciplines, but it is language that our mathematics and science teachers have already been asked to do, to help kids do. And one of the ways you can look at this from a literacy perspective is when they're constructing and defending a viable argument, they are building literacy skills. And a lot of it is metacognitive. And so when we're talking in literacy language, that's considering the author's perspective. And these are kind of the metacognitive questions students can have in mind as they approach this. The small shift will be, we need to be making this thinking visible and helping kids to understand the metacognition they're doing. So we might not talk about authors in math and science. In some cases, we will be able to. But in other cases, we might be talking about another student's writing or another student's work. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a quick math prompt, and we're going to think about these three questions. Can I explain the author's thinking? Do I agree with the author's thinking? And are there gaps in this reasoning? And these are powerful questions in an English classroom, but they're really powerful in mathematics and science and also social sciences. So we're going to take a look. This task is actually linked for you if you want it. It's a really rich task, and one of the reasons it's rich is because it gives a lot less information than a typical mathematics classroom task. This task has been used with kids 3rd grade all the way through 12th and with adults. And I can tell you, interestingly, the 3rd graders do better or are less hesitant to tackle it. So you can choose the grade level you think you would put this in front of. I would put it in front of my staff. The Tupelo Township was founded. The land was divided into sections that could be farmed. These are the sections. What I would tell students is that the word in each block is the last name of somebody. Could be their first name, whatever. And the prompt is just, what fraction of a section does each person own? It's a really powerful prompt because the student now has to make a lot of decisions. The first decision is, do I understand what's being asked of me? Like, what is the author thinking when they say, what fraction of a section does each person own? So I would have each child work on this independently, or they could work on it maybe in partners. But then what I would do is push them to the next person's perspective. And how I would do that is I would provide, you could provide a completed task that you completed. You could provide a completed task from another student or group of students, depending on how you made it run in your classroom. But if you saw this happening in a mathematics classroom, what would be happening is the students, because of how open-ended this task is written, you should expect multiple solutions to the same problem. I've done this problem with my 2 children when they were younger, and they gave me different solutions. And the power in multiple solutions is now they have to try to understand someone else's reasoning. And so oftentimes we don't think of a written math response as another person's perspective, but it is. This is their reasoning, this is their thinking, and mathematics is a language, very much like the scientist. This child constructed an argument. They said these are the divisions. And here is their argument. Can I understand what that person was thinking? Did they give me what the original author wanted me to give it? Are there gaps in this other person's reasoning? Now, As they do this, you could expect their own thinking to change, or you can expect their own thinking to be reinforced. And that's the piece of learning science that's really important in mathematics, in science, in an ELA classroom. When they're presented information, we have to also give them the opportunity to process that information. So imagine this is in a classroom, the students have completed it. Now they've changed perspectives by looking at another student's work, and they're trying to answer the question, do you understand this person's reasoning? Can you explain it for them? Okay, and with that, I'm gonna pause and say, if that lesson was happening in a mathematics classroom, if you dropped in and you saw that, what pieces of effective literacy do you think were supported in that child's day? What did you notice? You can drop some responses in the chat. I'm going to try to pull up the chat. I'm terrible at this while I have my slides presenting. Yes, definitely seeing a work towards understanding, building comprehension, choice, peer-to-peer conversation, right? Yeah, peer-to-peer, definitely. And did any of you notice that I did it as a read aloud? I also tried to model my thinking when I said, what did right? And so that was a math task, and I just hit 4 of the 6 very quickly. But as a leader, when you're walking through, if you're watching with that lens, you can also suggest a small shift. You could say, next time, could you read that aloud to them? Or I wonder what would happen if you let them talk to each other about their responses. So those are tiny shifts in instruction that can be really powerful when pulled together. All right, so let's take a look at the next task. We're going to move to the social sciences, and we can do this in any area. In the social sciences, as I said, like we're thinking constructing viable arguments and defending them is going to be really important in any social science. But something that's really powerful in social sciences is constructing meaning from opposing perspectives, right? And if you live your life or your career as a social scientist, you have to be able to do this. You have to be able to take in a lot of different perspectives and make sense of them for yourself. This is also an extremely important media literacy skill, especially now that they have students as adults will have access to unlimited information. Unlimited, I like to exaggerate, but an amazing amount of information. So in the social sciences, we're also going to think about what was the author thinking? It's the same first 3 questions, right? But what was included that supported this person's reasoning? Because now we know by design, we're gonna look at opposing perspectives. So, okay, they said this, how are they supporting it? Then I would add, and this is really pushing the level of rigor in this lesson, but what else should I consider? Like, okay, I read that, but what did they leave out? Because the missing piece in social science is often written that way by design. I'm going to give you my perspective, and I'm going to not emphasize things that don't support my meaning, it's a great way to write. However, let's think about it. What did this person not include because they didn't have good support for it, or they just didn't want any opposing support in the piece? But then really importantly, pushing them to talk or think about, what does this mean for me as a person? Is this going to change how I act, what I believe? What does it mean for me? So that is where I'm going to go with this social sciences lesson. And this can be done at a much younger age. This is a high school lesson I'm about to put up, but you can do this in a very different way with younger students. I would definitely change the level that I'm going to put this at. And let me just really quickly jump out of here and make sure everybody has access to this document. I'm going to put it in the chat for you. And we're going to take a look at this lesson. This is a sketch. It's not a full bore lesson, but it's got a decent amount of information in here for you. And so this is a high school lesson, and it just starts out with a teacher asking her whole class, when is it okay to break the law? And because this was a tech-based lesson, I've actually seen this done in a classroom. They actually used a Mentimeter and got kids to respond to the Mentimeter. And what happens in Mentimeter is it pulls up everybody's responses on one screen, so you can display that at the front. If the kids struggle, it's easy to give them a common occurrence that would make them question when it's okay to break the law. One of the most common ones with this prompt is your wife is in labor and you're far away from the emergency room. Is it okay to speed? Right? And oftentimes when you first put when is it okay to break the law, there will be kids in the classroom staunchly saying it's never okay. And then the kids start to put up scenarios and they're like, oh, maybe it's okay then. Oh, I'm not sure about then. So what this lesson proposes you do with that information is then you let them use Mentimeter, because then you can let them vote. And you can do that analog without any technology. But let them vote which one they want to debate. These are real world examples. They are going to be meaningful to them because they're pulling them out. So they've probably seen something, like maybe dad having to rush mom to the emergency room because they're in labor or whatever's happening in their family. And they have a debate, and Socratic debate needs a lot of norms and classroom, management to make it successful. But if you practice and practice throughout the year, you can get there. And then this shifts into a lesson. Once they've had that debate, and hopefully people are feeling the gray area of when is it okay to break the law, that's the time you introduce the mini lesson on civil disobedience. You talk about, is it okay to break the law for civil disobedience? And you can bring up real world examples of this from all over. And you provide what we're thinking about when we're talking about civil disobedience. And so this whole beginning part was activating thinking. Once you've done this, you've done a Socratic debate, you think the kids kind of understand where you're going with civil disobedience. Now you can ask your high school kids to research multiple perspectives. And you can do this in a lot of ways. The way it's written up in this sample lesson is research John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry and make sure that you find multiple perspectives as you're researching. Because what we're doing is preparing for a debate about, was John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry a case of civil disobedience? And I included in here, and you all have access to this, like a multiple perspectives protocol if you want to maybe build this out into a full lesson. But they've looked at multiple texts, they've decided, and now you get to decide before the debate, are you going to allow them to debate the perspective they most agree with, or are you going to push them to debate the other perspective? You hold the debate, right? I would use some kind of protocol. You use whatever protocol, or your teacher would use whatever protocol they're most comfortable with. And then for the debrief, I would have them journal. When we started this lesson, I thought, now I think this because. And this is a great opportunity to share out. You have to have a good classroom culture to have this share out. But wondering about, some people might have started this lesson with, it's never okay to break the law, and now they might be a little more on the fence. Some people might start this lesson with, it's never okay to break the law, and stick with that, right? And some people might have been like, laws are optional to start with, right? So, and then you could extend this to current events. I just threw this in here because it's so apt right now. Like, how does it relate to the coronavirus and the stay-at-home orders, etc.? There's a couple ways you can modify this activity. You can absolutely provide choice of historical figure. You can even say anybody you can find that you can offer multiple perspectives on. Depending on the age group, I might put more controls over that choice. I might not. But I did list a couple of other options that would be good. And if you are, depending on your class, you might want to offer different amounts of, here's a couple articles, you have to find 2 more. So that they can go out there and find. But if they're interested in a particular person, that would be great. Have them go look up that person. So before I jump, does anyone have questions about kind of the sketch of a lesson there? You can drop in the chat and maybe I can address before we jump off of the lesson. All right. So then with this lesson, what did you see? What literacy skills were supported in this lesson? I'll keep them on the screen, and I had to pop that down so I could see the chat. You can jump in the chat or you can jump on the microphone, whatever you're most comfortable with. Which of these 6 elements do you think students would experience? And yes, some of you are probably thinking that's not a one-day lesson. It's not a one-day lesson. In most schools, if you have a 90-minute block, you might not accomplish that still. They're still gonna have to have time to do research. So they're definitely, hopefully, writing about something personally meaningful to them in that reflection piece, because now they're talking about their heart and mind and their actions and what they might change. It can be designed with a lot of choice, depending on teacher comfort level, right? They could choose the beginning piece for themselves, or you could choose the opening personal debate. They can choose what they read in the articles, or you can offer some articles. That's good. What else? Peer-to-peer conversation, a structured peer-to-peer conversation, and then maybe later in the lesson, a less structured peer-to-peer conversation. Comprehension of choice resources, right? And hopefully, yes, I mean, hopefully this one, in a couple of days of class, we as the social studies teacher, social science teacher, hit all of these at some point. Hopefully we do some read aloud. Hopefully there should be meaningful peer-to-peer conversation, meaningful writing, comprehension. Accuracy can be hard, right? So getting them to that point where they're reading some of these nonfiction texts, nonfiction articles with accuracy can be hard, but it's something we can then support in our classroom. Excellent. Good. And so hopefully I did the 2 lesson pieces because what I wanted to talk about is how, as leaders, we can see literacy support and we can help support literacy and coaching by looking for these 6 essential elements to be done throughout a day. And supports are really going to be important as we try to build this out in a sustainable way. All right, thank you for jumping in and sharing in the chat. Now we're going to spend just a few minutes thinking about, okay, as leaders, how can we do this? What is needed to do this? So just a couple of tools and lenses for this implementation for you. This is one of my favorite tools, and I'm going to go through it, and then I'm going to offer a moment to see if anyone has questions. When we're trying to manage complex change, and I know many of you are feeling it severely right now, how complex all the changes we're facing are. When we're trying to manage complex change, we do need a framework for ourselves as leaders to help us think through what are the essential pieces that are going to make this change successful. This is just one framework for managing complex change, but it happens to be one of my favorite because it is a very accessible framework that can be put directly in front of teachers, or it can be kept to yourself, but it can be a great lens for thinking about what is happening in your planning process, but also what is happening as you hit teachers throughout the change process. So the way this works is the top line has the 5 major elements you need to have a successful complex change over time. They're saying if you want to be successful, you need to have a vision. Not only do you need to have a vision as the leader, you have to have a shared vision with everybody in your community. So thinking back to those 2 school-wide models, what do the parents know about the literacy community, the literacy culture in your school community? What do the teachers know? What do the students know? What do they expect? Because that's the vision. So they not only have to have heard it, they have to be able to communicate it back and agree with it. What skills do people need in order to be successful with this? So thinking about some of the small shifts, or that some of those things might actually be things your teachers are already doing in those lessons. But what are the small shifts? What are the skills that need to be supported in order for my teachers to be successful, my students to be successful, my parents to feel like the right things are being done? What are the incentives? So oftentimes when we roll out a vision, one of the major concerns is always funding. But what incentives do we have outside of funding or inside of funding? If you can fund things, that's always good. But there are other incentives, and a lot of people are motivated by many things outside of funding. So yeah, there are teachers we can't give bonuses, but there are other incentives when they start to see success in their students, when they feel like they're supported by colleagues, and this is something appreciated by the community. What are those incentives? What makes this teacher feel incentivized versus this teacher feeling incentivized? And how can I support that ongoing motivation throughout? And sometimes it's just checkpoints. Some teachers like, I just need someone to lean on when I need someone to lean on. And then do they have appropriate resources? Are we asking them to make a shift that they don't have the resources to make? And then the big one, this is huge. This is the project manager in me, but what is the action plan? A lot of times we as leaders know we need an action plan, but what we forget is to make sure that we follow it out with checkpoints and implementation so that we don't get false starts. So that's across the top. Those are the elements needed for success. But I think the powerful thing about this model is it also shows you kind of what kind of emotion or reaction you should expect if just one of those boxes is missing. So if you look at the 5th line down, it's showing you that if skills are missing, what you're likely to see in your staff and your community is a lot of anxiety. If you're seeing frustration, you could look back and say, oh, they're frustrated because maybe they don't have what they need to be successful. Maybe there are some resources missing from this model, from my implementation. How can I provide appropriate resources now for this implementation? Especially when we think about reading something that students understand. When you get into other fields or articles out there for social sciences, a lot of times those reading, the level of writing can be very high in academic college level writing. How can we provide resources at the right level to help them understand? And then how can we provide resources that push them to the next level? So having both types of reading available to kids and models of excellent writing in front of students. So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to ask you to think about for yourself, what is an initiative that you've been part of where you know one of these things was missing?
Teresa, as a former administrator, I can see even getting and what we've been through the last few months and how teachers have had to move to technology. You especially spoke to me the fifth block down where it's missing. If teachers felt if skills were missing, then it led to anxiety, what we've been through the last few months.
Mm-hmm.
So I do feel like that administrators now are going to have to make sure that, not knowing what's ahead of us, that even in teacher use of technology and integration, that the teachers have to be comfortable now. I have that own anxiety myself.
Yeah, I think a lot of us experience that anxiety with the shift to remote learning.
Yeah.
And I have seen some very creative ways to support those skills. I have seen 10-minute PDs in each weekly check-in. I've seen teachers teaching other teachers. I've seen digital pineapple charts. So where people are saying, I can teach you this. I'm really good with this tool. Or, hey, I got my kids to talk to each other somehow. Like there have been some really creative ways. And I think that skills line is going to be a major piece for leaders to be thinking about this summer, planning for fall. How are we going to get to the point where those skills are, where they're feeling supported? And there's a point where we have to accept it's not going to all be done before fall, but we're going to need ongoing skill building through fall too, which is not different than other years. We're just going to have to be more creative about how we build those skills than we did in prior years. And I'm seeing people contributing to the chat. Skills for online instruction, absolutely. Teaching online during COVID when students don't have access to technology, which is a major challenge nationally. Yes, experiencing frustration and false starts when you don't have resources or the action plan. And that's, sometimes I use Nosters in reverse because I think that like when you're hitting frustration, you can be like, what might be happening here? right? And you can go backwards. And this is one of the reasons I think
Good.
it's been such a powerful change management tool for me. Because a lot of them will be high level and just say, you're in this phase. Well, that doesn't help me to be actionable, to know what phase I'm in, but this helps me to be actionable. Oh, I see confusion. Maybe I'm not clear on what I'm expecting and what we're trying to build together.
Well, it may be also helpful to present this chart at grade level meetings or leadership team in order for them to take a look at where they feel they are to do an assessment for their grade level.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes these buckets do help. I've had these on giant poster papers during like whole staff PD, and they get to write on it, like, what skills do you feel like you have? What skills do you think you're missing? What incentives do you have? What incentives are missing? And it's, yeah, I mean, I would definitely engage faculty directly with this. That's my comfort level. Some leaders, I know one principal who actually just keeps this pasted in their handy dandy agenda, notebook, whatever they carry around, and just pulls it out all the time to help them remember, like, oh, I'm hitting this. I need to make a note about this. So hopefully this is a useful tool as you try to implement across, because I do think for me, being a high school math teacher, when I was challenged with how do you support literacy, I had this panic attack about not having the skills and not having the resources. And it took some good coaching to get me to see how I could teach mathematics with a literacy support without having to go rogue off of my content area. And so for me, that was the incentive. I was like, okay, now I have the skills. I feel good about being able to do this for kids. It's rare that you meet an educator who doesn't know that literacy is a major piece of every child's life. One more tool that I'm going to just share as you go into change management is being creative through the use of thinking about Covey's spheres of influence, concern, and control. And so if you haven't seen this before, this is a quick 30-second summary. Oh, sorry. I don't know what just happened. My screen is gone. Now you're all seeing random screen. There we go. Are we back? Okay. So sorry, I'm on a Mac. I'm not used to it. When, as a leader, as anybody, a child, an adult, anybody in the universe has kind of these three spheres. And the way you look at it is there are things you're absolutely in control of. And as a leader, that happened in our school and building, but we also know that there are things that are completely out of our control and in our sphere of concern. And that's especially important right now, right? Like there's legislation being passed. There's the school will start on this date, edicts being made. We can't control that. We might not even have influence over that. So that's going to fall into our sphere of concern. But for me as a leader, the sphere that's most important for my thinking and planning is this sphere of influence. And this is where if you can increase your sphere of influence, you can decrease your sphere of concern. Because if you can start influencing things that are in that area of concern, you have definitely improved your situation. But you can also take advantage of your sphere of influence when things are just outside of your sphere of control. Don't forget you can still influence them. And you see that influence in some very creative ways. If you think back to T.A. Duggar saying, a lot of schools will do, 20 minutes of reading, but is every adult in the building modeling that behavior? Because that is a piece of influence you can have without costing yourself money, and the kids don't even notice that they're being influenced. But what they're seeing, kids look at models. The adults in the building are their models. What they are seeing is this is a piece of becoming an adult. People around me, adults around me are reading, they are writing, they are talking about what they're reading and writing. They are looking at opposing perspectives. All of these pieces of modelings, they fall into that sphere of influence. And so as kids construct meaning of the content, they can also construct meaningful vision of themselves as an adult. And these pieces pulled together bring that culture of literacy. And so we are almost out of time. And what I want to do, all learning science says, it's important that we stop and reflect. So I threw a ton of stuff at you this morning. what I want you to do, and you can put this in the chat if you're comfortable, but if you just need to think for yourself, I'm going to stop talking for a minute. I want you to think about what is one thing that you can commit to implementing this year that supports a culture of literacy in your school. It can be something we talked about. It could be something that you got that I didn't talk about, but the idea came to you during this session. So I'll stop talking. You can go ahead and think about one thing to commit to. I love it. Yep, thinking about how you can engage leaders, new schools in this conversation. I love it, Catherine. And Leanne's adding, identifying small shifts that can be made. And those small shifts are a great way to scaffold as we pull into new experiences and managing change. What is the small thing I can do that's going to have a big impact? All right. Well, with that, I'm going to throw it back to Bethany to kind of share a little bit of information on evaluation and certificate.
Yeah, so we are grateful that you spent the morning with us. We want to thank you for attending this virtual Summer Institute session, specifically for leaders. We would love for you to take our 1-minute survey, seriously, 1 minute. It's going to allow us to do a couple things, reflect on your thoughts about the session. We're always looking for ways to improve. And so your thoughts will help us do that. Also, it'll allow us to collect your information if you would like to receive a certificate of attendance for this session. So you'll notice in the chat that John Payne has added a link. It says you may use this live link to access the evaluation form. Again, just click on that link, complete the form, and we ask that you complete that ASAP because it will timestamp that form, and that will help us kind of process that ahead of our next session kicking off at 10:30. All right, Teresa, I will hand it back over to you for any concluding thoughts.
Yes, great. Thank you. So this is my contact information. You can feel free to reach out to me at any time. But I've also commented that they'd like some school ideas. Oh, that's my slide deck. I'm sorry. I have somewhere in here do you have it, Bethany, the link to the Rural Life Literacy website? It must be my next session deck. I'm going to grab it for you all and drop it in the chat. We have a link to the resources that talk about some of the other strategies the schools have used, and I want you all to have that. It's on the Nicewonger website. I just want to make sure that people get that so that you have.
I can try to see if I can find
I know, I apologize. I'll go to the teacher session. It must be in there. But that will allow you. But other than that, I am all set. So I thank you all for joining me this morning. I hope that you found the session useful. Okay, apparently I made it up, actually. Let me grab it.
All right, at this time, yeah, we can hang out with Teresa if you have any questions just for her. You can also feel free to hop off. Our next session starts at 10:30. May see some of you there.
Yeah, the next session is this, but at the teacher level. So it'll be a little different. And there, I finally got it in the chat. So with that, thank you all. It's 10 a.m. Good timing. Took me a minute to find that link, but I appreciate all of your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.